In the first 7 seconds, people are making half a dozen value judgments about you. 7 seconds. Are you friend or foe? Are you somebody I'm going to want to hang with for the next 20 minutes and listen to? It's ironic to me that most people in presentations leave the greatest degree of winging it for the first 90 seconds, when that is the most important part of the presentation.
Welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Thanks, AJ. It's good to be here.
I'd love to start off with, what is a media guru?
I've never aspired to that title, or I've accepted it as a title. But in this line of work, it's really about helping people say things that rise above the din and the noise that is just deafening today, right? Throughout the business world, I think there's a conformity zone that everybody exists in. It's fairly narrow, where people talk a lot and say very little. And so what we try to do is help people say things that stick in people's minds for a little bit, because I think if you have retention, you're able to persuade people, influence people, motivate them, inspire them. Whatever is the purpose of communicating, I think you have a greater shot at accomplishing it.
The media landscape has changed, especially in the last 20 years of me being a podcaster.
Right.
So getting guests on the show back in the day was like pulling teeth impossible. And now we're seeing the rise of podcast media with presidents and politicians going on shows and almost, in a way, creating an environment for the longer form conversation that I think a lot of the media training and the packaging that went into being a media guru, there's been a lot of pushback against that. How has it changed in your line of work looking at this landscape?
It is not about just the pithy soundbite, that you can't hang anything on that, right? And it requires that for us, our clients, know how to tell a story, know how to metaphorically make a point through something anecdotal. And it amazes me that for all the literature that's been written on the importance of storytelling, that people still say, I'm just not a good storyteller. I just don't know how to do it. And people still struggle with that a lot. And it's in there because as we're talking to them and I'm hearing about their experiences, oftentimes it's our role to say, that's great. That's how you should start your talk. That story is metaphorically connected to the bigger message you're trying to convey. So sometimes it's about a separate outside set of ears hearing the gems that are in there that they may not realize are gems.
Right.
But it definitely requires people to be more thoughtful. In an hour conversation, you really have to have the goods, right?
Yeah.
You have to be able to understand the subject matter and have a certain amount of experience. It's harder to fake it today, I think.
Yeah, I think people want that authenticity, which is why long form content has become so popular. I think the rise of that, wanting the back and forth, wanting the mistakes and the errors in there and letting the conversation fully breathe is what's drawn so many people to this medium. Mm-hmm. And it can be hard when you're professionally very polished and have a narrative that you want to push and a box that you feel really comfortable in, to field questions outside of that and try to keep up with what the host might be asking you in this environment.
And I think the real person is exposed in this environment a lot more.
Yeah.
And as you know better than anybody, than they are in the 5-minute hit on this network or that network. And so I think we're starting to see what really makes people tick and who they really are in this environment. And I think that's why it's become so popular.
Yeah.
We're not getting this sanitized, fake impression of somebody.
For our clients, we get the same thing. I'm terrible at telling stories. And I laugh at that because, do you have friends? Do you have family? Of course, we share stories about our day. We share stories about things happening in our lives. But oftentimes when it comes to a work situation or a leadership role where we're trying to influence someone, we lose the ability to create the narrative around that. So when it comes to helping someone begin to deepen and strengthen their storytelling, what are you looking for and how are you coaching them through that process?
For people who really feel as though they don't have a hold on what comprises a story, we try to break it down into 3 basic elements. They have to start by just setting the scene. Tell me what's going on here. Don't assume anything. Don't suffer from the curse of knowledge. I think where a lot of stories fall down and fail is that they know these people really well and they throw around names or acronyms, and you have to understand, what can I reasonably assume the audience knows, even if it's colleagues sitting around a conference table. If I'm referring to my cousin of, for all my life, they don't know that. You have to really spell things out, at least in the beginning. So making sure the curse of knowledge isn't something that victimizes you in that setting of the scene. And then, is there a basic challenge or tension in the story? Is there something that has to be overcome? And then what's the ultimate resolution of that? It's amazing how many stories typically fall into that structure.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of our clients, at least, and probably a lot of our listeners, when it comes to setting the scene, we get focused on describing the details and we actually lose sight of the emotional context, which is a big part of the payoff. And a lot of the tension is also tied to the emotion. It's not tied to the numbers, the figures that we're trying to explain, but what were you feeling in that moment? What were people in the room feeling in that moment? That's a really important part of setting the scene that we work with our clients on, because without the emotional context, the tension just doesn't really build, and then it can't release at the end.
No, and telling a good story is not unlike telling a joke. And we all know what happens when somebody tells us a joke and the setup is just interminable. And there's this, I get it. Let's just get to the punchline. And so we are, like you, constantly trying to encourage them. Nobody really needs that detail. That's just bogging down the pacing of the story. It's interesting. So much of this awareness of how to keep storytelling moving, for me, happened when I was a producer in TV.
Yeah.
And I was a producer at 2020 at ABC, back when long form storytelling was actually 10, 11 minutes. Yeah. Today, long form is like 3 minutes. But you would produce a story, it would go on the air, and the next morning you would be called into the executive producer's office, and they had what they called minute by minute ratings. And so instead of just them saying, oh, you got a 7.8 and a 20 share last night, they would break it down and show you, see, a minute and a half into the story, when you introduced this new character, you lost them. And it was a vicious kind of post-game analysis, right? Because it was really exposing where you failed as a storyteller, or see, you piqued their interest here because you teased this element. And as difficult as it was to go through that, it was a really good training ground for understanding the balance between being visual, setting the scene, making people feel like they're immersed in the story, but not getting so bogged down in the details that it just drags.
Yeah, I mean, that feedback, I think, in a lot of contexts for us in the workplace is completely lacking. Maybe you'll see some people zone out on a Zoom meeting, but yeah. It's also difficult when you're in that presentation mode to see when you are losing the audience. And I think that's why it trips so many of us up when we're trying to prepare for these moments where we know we have to nail it, where we're not actually reading the room and gauging, okay, maybe I should cut the setup a little shorter and get to the actual tension here.
Yeah. We in researching this book, we looked at engagement and retention really deeply, and one of the studies we found was that 10 minutes is really the maximum amount of time you have in presenting where you're just going to lose people. I don't care how good an orator you are. And the takeaway was, every 10 minutes, let's say you have to present for 30 minutes, every 10 minutes you have to do something to radically change the style and the content, whether that's throwing in a video clip or whether that's introducing some little survey in the middle of it. But something's got to change at the 10-minute mark.
Very fascinating.
And we find that a lot of people, when they present, just exist in this very narrow range of doing it the same way, saying it the same way, where variance is really the key. Variance of your voice pacing, your pitch, your projection, even how loud you say something, sometimes just pulling back, but even your sentence structure. A lot of people fall into a very predictable pattern of their sentences always being the same structure. Breaking that up, sometimes on the heels of something long, say something really short and declarative and punchy. And keeping that mix going, you have a newborn,
Yeah.
right? And at some point, to get her to go to sleep, you will probably put her in a car seat and take her for a drive.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if you've done it yet.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's not much fun in LA,
No,
but
right. Right.
it works.
But where you want to drive her is on an open freeway where the rhythmic, the thump, the thump, the thump of the road creates this lulling effect. The last thing you want to do with her is drive in stop and go traffic.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, when they present, are in that cruise control mode.
Lol.
And yeah, and it does put the audience into a little bit of a stupor.
Now, something you did there that is in the book and I think is really important to being memorable is recognizing who your audience is and speaking to them.
Mm-hmm.
So using analogy
Mm-hmm.
and using your ability as a storyteller to draw people into experiences that they can relate to, even if what you're sharing is completely foreign to them.
And understanding, I feel like that idea of know your audience has been around a long time, right?
Yeah.
It's not new advice, but it's got to transcend just being handed a scouting report as to who I'm talking in front of today and who is this group and what work have they done. I find that if I'm going to be giving a talk somewhere and let's say it's 10:30, but there's breakfast being served at 8:30, I will show up not for the food, but to show up and try to have as many mingling 90-second conversations as I can with the people who are there. And literally just say to them, what would be a big win for you today? What would you love to come away with in terms of a new piece of knowledge or some insights and it, while their answers are not going to make me go back to the drawing board and completely redo my presentation, I do find it's invaluable to be able to just create a little ad lib moment in the moment of the presentation where I'll say, it's interesting. I was talking to Diane over breakfast this morning and I was really intrigued to hear that one of the challenges you're facing as a group is X, Y, and Z. And I have found that really helps with engagement and retention with the audience to bring the audience up with you and involve them in the conversation more than just a briefing document would do.
Well, I think a key point in that is the preparation piece.
Mm-hmm.
So first off, you know your stuff inside and out. So you're not cramming the night before what's going in the slides, what you're going to be presenting. The fact that you already have the confidence in what you're going to be presenting allows you then the ability to ad lib and bring in the audience in these ways.
Right.
And I think for a lot of us, we try to focus on the preparation as a way to avoid that and get too in our head around over preparing and not create those opportunities to actually draw in whoever we're speaking to, colleagues, coworkers, our boss, in a way that actually matters.
Yeah.
So how do you balance those two when you're preparing or working with a client who needs to prepare for something that's, the stakes are incredibly high?
We often say, practice like you've never won and play like you've never lost. And so one of the things that has been really clear to me after many years of doing this is that the people who we would all consider very, very skilled at presenting and public speaking are the ones that relentlessly prepare and relentlessly rehearse. And that ratio of the amount of time you should rehearse is about 8-1. So for every 15 minutes of a presentation you have to give, you should be finding time in the days leading up to that to rehearse for 2 hours out loud. And I don't know if I put it in the book or not, but there's a great story about Barack Obama, who when he was about to debate Mitt Romney in 2012, David Axelrod, who was his chief advisor, had laid a stack of videos on his desk and some files to brief him on what to expect debating Romney. And he noticed it hadn't been touched. Obama was out shaking hands at Hoover Dam. I think it was in Las Vegas. And he pulled him aside and he said, Mr. President, is there anything we can do to help engage you? Because we know you're not really engaged. And he said, David, don't worry. I'm a game time player. I will show up at game time. And he totally got creamed in that first debate. And it really made me realize that if that guy can't mail it in and shirk the prep and rely on instincts and experience, there's very little hope for the rest of us. And he never made that mistake again.
Yeah, I think that preparation is a part that's often missing in the behind the scenes of the great speakers, the motivators, the people that are memorable. Obviously, we remember their key moments, hopefully positive ones. There's certainly some negative ones that you cover in the book that we'll share as well. But in those positive moments, they almost make it look effortless, like it was off the cuff. It felt very real and in the moment to me as a participant in the audience. But the hours and hours and hours of preparation that went into that allowed for that to happen in the presentation.
Years ago, I had done a training session with Samantha Bee, the comedian, and she had written a book, and we were working on her interviews for the book. And just as an aside, she said, "So, who do you like? What are some of the comedians you like?" And I said, "Well, I just think Ricky Gervais is hilarious." And she said, "Oh my God, that guy is a total technician." I said, what do you mean by that? She said, "He knows every single move, right down to the last interrupted thought and tangent. And he's a master at making it seem completely spontaneous, but there is not an ounce of it that is." And it was revealing, because I think good presenting does have a lot of parallels with stand-up comedy. You are trying to create that illusion of spontaneity. And I think when you do it in a planned way and you get a good response from the audience, I think what that does is it gives you encouragement to try real genuine spontaneity, just little pockets of it that are interspersed within a very planned, presentation.
Yeah, I know in running our training programs in person over the last 20 plus years, thousands of times through it, my background as a scientist was very in my head analytical. My partner, Johnny, rock and roller, very used to performing on stage.
Yeah.
And something that he shared for me was exactly that. Like, this is a performance on stage. When you are prepared enough, you can actually do all the fun stuff off script.
Yes.
And that allows you that improvisation that you see from the great musicians, but it's only because you've actually practiced the meat over and over and over again. That allows you to dip out and bring in the audience and share that little off-the-cuff joke, knowing that behind all of that was massive amounts of preparation, having done it thousands of times over.
Yeah, that ad-lib moment is like letting go of one trapeze bar. And the experience of knowing where I'm going is the other bar that's swinging towards you. If you are just out there winging it, there's no other bar heading in your direction, and the only place from there is down.
Now, when it comes to preparing, there's a lot of pieces that go into it. I think a lot of people put a ton of effort on the actual presentation, the slides, what they're putting forward, but the book covers hand gestures, tonality. There are so many other components that go into actually being memorable for the right reasons. So how do you look at the presentation from that practice standpoint around, okay, the preparation of the slides to the hand motions moving on stage and actually the body language piece that's so important to what you're sharing in terms of your message?
There was a really interesting, interview with Francis Ford Coppola that I saw a while back. And the interviewer asked him, "Do you have a formula for movie making?" And he said, "Well, I learned years ago that you should find your three best things and take the best thing and finish with it. Take the second best thing and start with it, and then find some logical place in the middle for the third." And he's talking about movie making, but movie making is storytelling. We hope that a business presentation is also storytelling. In fact, one of the big mind shifts I think everybody should have is that their deck is not just a series of potentially disjointed slides, but there is some overarching story you're telling from slide one to slide whatever. And so I think that idea of beginning strong and ending strong plays really well into a presentation. In fact, it's something that's called the primacy recency effect, right?
Yeah.
Where people tend to remember the most in the 5 minutes of your presentation and the last 5 minutes. And that breaks down even to just every individual slide. I think most people in the presentations I've seen, and I've seen thousands over the years, tend to start with a warning about what they're going to talk about in the slide. Okay, so for a minute, let's take a step back and let's analyze how this is looking from a so-and-so perspective. And instead of like getting right to it with some sharp, declarative, concise statement of value that springboards you into the slide. So what's the crisp beginning? And then knowing what the finish line looks like is a really good insurance policy not to wander and meander and drone on endlessly within the slide because you know you have to get to that finish point. Or what is the segue line that gets me and foreshadows and signposts what's coming up in the next slide at the end of the one I'm on? You know, a lot of people in company presentations will say everything there is to say about slide one. Click. Okay, so now it's almost like I wouldn't know where to go if I didn't see slide two in front of me.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can allude to what's coming up in slide two before you've clicked to it, I think what that does is it makes you seem more in command, that you're driving the train, not that you are 100% reliant on that thing up there on the screen being the star of the show.
And we've all been in those presentations where the presenter is just reading directly from the slide.
Or what we call slide karaoke.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the first thing I think of is, if you had just sent this to me ahead of time, I wouldn't have to be sitting here. You're adding nothing. People shouldn't confuse bullets with presenter's notes.
Right.
And a lot of times they're almost exactly the same.
And the imagery that slides allow for. So we can only go so far with our words, but to use the slides as a way to add in that relevant information in the form of an image, maybe it doesn't have to be text on the slide. Maybe it's an image of what you're trying to illustrate that could actually hammer the point home. So earlier, we were talking about, okay, winging it, and you brought up the trapeze analogy. And it's like, well, if I had a presentation with a photo of trapeze, that's going to be far more memorable than me breaking down, well, this is what it's like to go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3.
Yeah, we retain information two ways, verbally and visually. And when I see a presentation that I'm working with a client on, and they're just bullets on a white background, I think you're forfeiting 50% of your retention powers here by not having something visually underscore the points you're making.
And no one wants to be the presenter that people are dreading going next. Like, I don't want to sit through another one of these PowerPoints.
Yeah. No, death by PowerPoint is not something that you want to be in the front of the room while it's happening.
So what are some misconceptions that people have around being memorable? Because we've all heard some bad advice over the years, and I'm sure you've had to work through some bad advice with your clients.
Yeah. I've had people who are in charge of communications at a company tell me that I have to tell this executive, the days of you starting a presentation with a joke are over. It's not that you're a terrible joke teller, but oftentimes the joke is completely disconnected to the subject of the presentation. So it just feels like this random gratuitous thing they do. So start off with a joke is about as valuable information as picture the audience in their underwear. The two are in the same category as almost worthless. And I think that the other common mistake is learning through osmosis and watching other people in a company, regardless of whether they're good or bad, because maybe they have a senior role. And, well, this is the way, obviously, they do it within this culture, and mimicking how other people present. Most people are not doing it in a really engaging, memorable way. So the role models aren't really worthy of being role models. And also ask yourself, okay, I know how I'm going to start this slide. I know how I'm going to finish this slide. One other thing that you should think about is, what is a sticky line? What is a memorable way of positioning this information? And those are the three things I should know by heart in each slide. And they should be concise, simple sentences. If you make those three things the only things you truly memorize, you're not going to be overburdening yourself. Everything you say in and around those three things can have a little conversational wiggle room. But one of the things that we cover in the book are 7 devices
the Mag 7.
The Magnificent 7 that help you be a little bit more memorable in how you position information.
So give us some of those 7 tips to become more sticky, because
Okay.
I think that's usually what's missing for a lot of us on the presentation. It's like, I know what I want to say, I know the key points that need to be made, but I'm not really thinking about how's the audience going to retain this as they leave the room, or they go to the next conversation, or they come back and say, hey, I got to bring you back in the office on this project now.
Right. Well, first, people love analogies because an analogy has tremendous power to help us understand, or help the audience understand, a concept that may be foreign and unfamiliar to them by comparing it to something common to everyone's experience. And usually it's done in a very concise way. So for instance, I was training a bunch of hedge fund people years ago, and they were doing a panel conversation on Brexit, which could be a really difficult topic to be pithy on, right? So this one guy was talking about the political landscape, and he said, I mean, listen, let's face it, before the last prime minister left office, she was the chess player only at the king left. And she was just moving it around one space at a time till she got checkmated. You know, I don't remember anybody else who was on that panel that day. I don't remember what anybody else in that panel said that day, but I still remember that guy. And what was interesting about it was he made the analogy completely out of the realm of British politics. And for 10 seconds, he gave me an opportunity to visualize a chessboard. He almost gave me a little mental vacation where now I could completely immerse myself in some other imagery and some other reality. And after those 10 seconds, what I found happened was I got a little mental refresh, and I was now okay about reabsorbing myself in the topic of Brexit. You just need that little bit of a break. So analogies, metaphors, really, really valuable. And they're usually very visual too.
Yeah. And I think that part of recognizing, hey, I don't know much about British politics, but I know chess.
That's right.
A lot of people fail on analogies because they also choose something that a lot of people can't relate to in their analogy.
Yes. I mean, I was working with a client in the logistics field, and we were talking about supply chain, another subject that makes people's eyes roll in the back of their head. And so maybe people don't understand all the factors that go into ships anchored, outside of the harbor. They're waiting to unload refrigerators and dishwashers. But what we said was, at the height of the supply chain woes, what we basically had was a 6-lane freeway trying to merge into a 1-lane country road. And so everybody has sat in that traffic, right?
Yeah.
Squeezing into the merge. So it makes it pretty much universally relatable. What you said is so true. The relatability has to be universal. Has to be something everybody experiences.
And that point of, every slide has to have a purpose.
Yes.
We're not just throwing, 30 slides because we have a 30-minute presentation and now I can have a 1 minute per slide cadence. But every slide has a purpose and a takeaway and something about it that the audience can chew on that can lead to it becoming memorable is so important.
Yes. And that's why, of those 3 things that you should know by heart in each slide, opening line, closing line, and the sticky idea. What is it? Not that we're ever going to say this in a presentation, but the classic, if you remember nothing else from this slide, I want you to remember this. You should be delivering that in a way that you don't need to tee it up with that overt warning. It should be something pithy, punchy. Now, in a world where we're asked to talk for half an hour, obviously you have to have the goods around all of that. It can't just be cleverness on top of cleverness. But there's no question that something created with a little imagination and a little visual stimulation has so much more value than just going through things in a very corporate way with all the same jargon and all the same cliche expressions, which we've all heard.
Now, body language is also important to the delivery,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something that I know a lot of our clients struggle around overthinking and getting in their head around what to do with my hands, how to actually position myself, what's the right body language I should be using. So coach me through how you, with your clients, work through a presentation and the nonverbal communication that should go along with it.
I usually find clients are telling me, oh, you're going to have a hard time with me because I talk with my hands. I say, I don't know who told you that, but that's fine as long as you avoid 2 or 3 basic rules. And that is just don't do the same gesture over and over again. That's sort of what we see in the political world. And don't have your hand be a metronome for how you punctuate your words, right? That starts to become distracting. So, but other than that, I find as long as you're not being too literal to show and telly, like I've got 3 points to make today. Point number 1, I don't think people want to be condescended to like that. But other than that, just let your hands do whatever they want to do. As long as they're not in constant manic motion, they should come and rest pretty much around where your belt buckle would be.
Okay.
Not clenched with to show tension, not shaped. That was what reporters in the 80s did.
Yeah.
On camera. Just like imagine you're taking your thumb and your forefinger of one hand and just kind of clenching it on the nail of your other forefinger. Palms facing in, backs of your hands facing out. And from here, I have a very short distance to have them get into the action and a very short distance to rest. If they're down by your sides, which doesn't really make anybody look comfortable, they've got a long way to come up to get into the action. And then when you're done with them, they have a long way to drop. And it just becomes more of a choreographed gesture instead of an organic gesture. Standing in front of a room, the majority of people will feel this shot of adrenaline just from the nerves.
Yeah.
And our bodies like to get rid of all that excess nervous energy. And typically our feet wind up being the portal through which we try to expunge it. And so that results in what I call the stationary march, where you're not actually walking from one side of the room or one side of the stage to the other, but your feet never actually stop moving. Right? You're rocking, you're swaying, you're stamping around in place, and it can look very fidgety in front of the room. If you stand with your weight forward on the balls of your feet, you feel a little pressure in your toes, not that your heels are off the ground, but just weight forward, you're going to find it very hard to start rocking and swaying, and you strike a more commanding pose in front of the room.
Yeah, I think, and I've heard this advice around owning the stage and movement across the stage. And I think sometimes it could be exaggerated where we're like running across to try to get our point across. But
yeah. It's like we got to get our steps in.
It is good to engage different parts of the audience if the stage allows it without running back and forth. And that's a way to allow your feet to expunge some of that energy.
Right. As long as it's not going to look like pacing. A lot of people they'll be stage right or right side of the room. They'll walk to the left side of the room, but not stay there. And next thing you know, they're moving back and it starts to look like, the tiger in the cage.
Yeah. And then it's hard for the audience to keep their eyes on you.
Or sometimes something I see a lot is people will pick the time to move in the middle of making an important point. And what we prefer people do is move in thematic transition and then come to a stop before you deliver the important idea.
So you talked a little bit about tonality and its importance. And I know many of the clients we work with and probably many in our audience, when it comes to that tension and pressure they feel professionally around presenting, they actually lose a lot of the tonality variation and the emotion in their words, and they try to keep it even keel, keep a poker face, but it actually works against you in terms of being sticky and memorable.
The absence of mistakes, identifying perfection as what you're going for, is usually really detrimental to your presenting skills, because then what you're doing is you're playing not to lose. Your whole goal is to just not have any little hiccup. And that makes people flatten out, where you stop taking chances and you stop varying the sound of your voice and stop adding emotion into how you're expressing yourself. I would much rather have people make a little stumble here or a little hiccup there, but really put their emotional back into what they're saying. And we have a definition of energy at our company, Clarity Media Group, where we say energy is your palpable enthusiasm for the value of the information you're sharing to your audience. If you don't look jazzed about how important this is, they will not be. You have to lead by example. And a lot of people just present in this very narrow range of energy, enthusiasm, their voice flattens out. We will actually work with people and say, what is it you're saying here? What is the underlying emotion of this paragraph? Are you optimistic? Are you incredulous? Are you whatever? And what is the tonal sound of those emotions? And let's work on delivering it so that we are bolding and underlying that emotion instead of just saying it in words.
One of the things that I found helps me in this realm, and certainly working with our clients, is actually looking to express the emotion physically changes my tonality. So we have to do advertisement reads for the show, and oftentimes if I'm just reading straight from the script, it's a little harder for me to get that varied tonality. But if I'm actually expressing in my face, the tonality then follows.
Yes.
So for a lot of our clients, we film them so they can see, oh, if I'm not expressive in my face, then I default to that monotone, very narrow band of interesting words and variation in my tonality to draw people in. But if we can get them to be more expressive with their face and wear the emotion, the tonality follows.
Sure, absolutely. And you often hear people say, you can hear the smile in that person's voice, right? And it's very true. I think another great thing is if there's not video involved and you're just doing an audio conversation that's not as common today with virtual being so prevalent, but do an interview walking around a room, moving. If you have notes that you want to just keep at hand, put a headset on, walk around your house. Think about how you have a really animated conversation with a friend or a family member, usually, pacing between the kitchen and your living room, and you just can't stand still. And that's the energy that you want to go for. Being in a, big comfy chair is going to change the perceived energy of your voice.
Now, with that tension and pressure in a lot of presentations, we also find there's filler words, and we try to add more than necessary. And you have a whole chapter on the book about a verbal diet, working with clients around trimming down the words and actually being more concise to be more memorable.
Yeah.
Why is that so important?
Because most of us take too long to make a point, and everybody's attention spans are shrinking. Everybody's calendars are being overloaded, and most people are sitting in a meeting thinking, oh my God, there's 5 minutes left to this meeting and my next meeting starts in 6 minutes. And just imagine how much of a personal hero you'd be to people if you were able to chop a 40-minute meeting to a 30-minute meeting because you were efficient in communicating what had to be said. And I think that effective, concise communications, as I know it's a productivity matter.
Yeah.
Because a lot of time is wasted in professional settings because people can't make the point.
Or they can't discern the point, and then they're running around trying to figure out what leadership actually wanted. Right.
There's some interesting stats that we uncovered in Speak Memorably. One of them is that $1.2 trillion of money is lost in the business world because of poor communication. That's a staggering number. And the effectiveness or the perceived effectiveness in a Harris poll of how leaders communicate has fallen about 12% in recent years. And so it is a business imperative that people understand, how do I make this point concisely, memorably, and make sure everybody's clear about it on their way out the door.
Well, sometimes we try to make things concise by adding acronyms and shortening things in ways that can also be detrimental to those in the audience who can't follow along and don't know what those acronyms are. So what's the balance there, and how should I approach going on this verbal diet to be more memorable?
We hypothesized what it would be like if you were told, okay, on average, you speak 16,000 words a day. Now imagine that you're only getting 12. You're only getting 12,000 words. And it's our belief that you would be so much more selective in how you communicate, realizing that that tabulator is running all day long, and that there's a real risk that come 4 o'clock, you run out of words. And then you have to pantomime everything between 4 and 5:30 or whenever you leave the office. And there's no question you would be more strategic, have fewer filler words. You'd be more thoughtful about how you communicate. You probably prepare more. And also with filler words, you would probably take your time a little bit more. Filler words typically are a product of speed because your brain is always out ahead of your mouth navigating what's the thought I want to communicate? What are the words I'm going to use to communicate this thought? And then in 600 or so milliseconds, it's fed to your mouth. And filler is typically what your mouth has to do while your brain is trying to make the next decision, but hasn't come up with it yet. And our advice is slow down your speaking pace so your mind can navigate farther out ahead to understand where it's all going and what words are going to be used to communicate the thought. I was working with a woman not too long ago, and I was not surprised when I put the video of her interview through our AI tool to see that instead of speaking at 170 words per minute, which is almost the top of the normal range, she was at 230 words per minute, which is a significant, amount higher. Not only that, though, AJ, she, in about a 90-minute conversation and role play, said, 320 times and said 310 times. And there is no question in my mind that all of that filler was directly correlated to her words per minute.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, so much of that filler is now being the filler, I feel, is I'm losing my train of thought. I'm trying to get at the idea of we pick it up in our conversations with coworkers and team members, and especially younger generations. These filler words become just habit and routine because we're all using them, passing them around. And then you get in a presentation and the filler words plus increasing the rate of speech, now you're at 230 words. Who in the audience can follow along?
They can't. And if you think about it, there are two modes we communicate in. There's internal, how we speak among our colleagues at work. And then there's external, where maybe we're in front of an audience or clients or people outside of our company or the media, whatever it may be. And the internal occupies probably about 90% of our time, maybe even more. And the mode that we're in externally is 10% or less. And it is really difficult to adopt and execute this external style of communicating when the internal is so ingrained. Very few people are able to flip a switch. So our recommendation is try to speak in that external mode internally, not try to change suddenly when you're now in this other realm.
Yeah, and it can certainly be difficult, which is one of the reasons that we do the video work with our clients. And it certainly seemed to help your client. And now with the rise of AI, and we could talk about technology, I think a big challenge for a lot of us is this mode 2 video, where much of our confidence and comfort around communication was in a room together with other humans. And I know for myself, going from being on stage and preparing to do a keynote to a live audience to then switching to Zoom, it's a totally different environment. And I had to go through some woes and some panics around, okay, how am I managing this virtual room?
Yeah.
But now it's ubiquitous. We are forced to be on Zoom virtually 24/7. So how do you approach that in preparing from a media training standpoint to now video, not just a live audience?
There's a belief that we have that as important as it is to read a room, you cannot read a Zoom. And that's simply because that thumbnail chain of people who are on the call that vertically goes down the right side of your screen, they are not going to give you the same signs of attentiveness that you're going to get from somebody in front of you at a conference table. If they're looking off screen and they're writing, you may, in your worst assumption in your mind, think they're texting a friend. Whereas they could be taking copious notes of everything you say, but you're left to imagine maybe the worst, or their camera goes off. I'm sure we've all had that happen. To me, that's the equivalent of somebody getting up and walking out of a conference room. Yeah. Same thing. And so there are lots of things that can happen that can really shake our confidence on a virtual call. And I tried an experiment a while back where I realized I was distracting myself from the task at hand, and that was doing the best job I could presenting to the audience, because I kept looking over at that thumbnail chain to see if what I was saying was landing and resonating. And I wasn't getting what I wanted, because that just doesn't happen on Zoom to the same extent. And so one day I just closed all the windows, all of them, and treated it like an old style conference call. And I found I was a lot more focused. I was a lot more confident, because I stopped trying to get something I was never going to get. And that's the affirmation and confirmation that this is landing, it's interesting, it's helpful, because while it may be all those things to those people, they're not going to give you the outward signs that that's happening.
Right. For me, another one was turning off self-view, because so rarely are you on stage staring at yourself. You're more looking to engage the audience. And even when I'm on stage, I'm looking to engage an individual in the audience instead of staring at a screen full of faces staring back at me.
Right.
And that self-view, I think with it being on by default, so many of us get in our head even more looking back at ourselves. Am I saying it right? Oh, I was looking in the wrong direction.
Wow, I kind of need a haircut. Maybe I should make an appointment. Yeah. It can be very, very distracting. The couple of other things that I found in really analyzing life on Zoom was this phenomenon that we call in the book Zoomnesia, which was this awareness that all of these training sessions that were now exclusively on Zoom were all starting to bleed together. And I was having a really hard time differentiating the session I did Monday afternoon from the one Wednesday morning. And that never happened to me before. And I realized that the trappings of all these sessions were now absolutely identical. I was always in the same seat. They were always in the same window. And while the content was different, all of the things that helped trigger our memory were
the same.
Yeah. And the only antidote to that was just taking really detailed notes on every session. But Zoom fatigue is a factor. Zoomnesia is a factor. It's hard and it's exhausting, as you know.
Well, I think that's another important point around brevity and being concise, because if you can stick the landing in 20 minutes instead of 30, people are going to be happy to show up to your next Zoom session knowing that they're going to get the 10 minutes back and not be stuck there with you droning on.
Yeah, exactly. And also the amount of time, our typical one-on-one session at Clarity is like 4 hours. You cannot do 4 hours virtually.
No.
2 hours is the max.
Yeah, I find 90 minutes for me and I'm tapping out.
Yeah, exactly. But, a lot of other things that happen in terms of our physical presence in front of a room, adrenaline can betray us, and it can have some negative effects on our presence in front of a room. The other thing, in addition to making it hard to stand still, is our eyes are probably going to dart around the room more because we're nervous and not really land and connect with anybody. And we're often advising people to find 4 people, either around a conference table or out in an audience, maybe one in each quadrant of the room, who represent those good, encouraging listeners, the people who smile, the people who nod, they look connected with your content, and just play to those 4 people. I know that when I look out into an audience and I see somebody taking their phone out and doing this, confidence killer.
Mm-hmm. Even worse on Zoom when they're checking their email and they're darting to the top of the screen because a notification popped up.
Yeah. And so I want to make sure that the people who I make eye contact with in the audience are going to bolster my confidence through the rest of it instead of shake my confidence.
So there's 2 avenues I'd love to explore with you around AI. I think the first, I have this hypothesis that human communication is actually going to become even more important in the age of AI.
Mm-hmm.
So these skills that we're talking about here that you probably haven't been trained on, there's no work conference where they're saying, okay, here's how you give a keynote and here's how you present. You're just expected to do it. But learning and strengthening these skills is going to put you at an advantage with the rise of AI. And the second is how you're leveraging these tools with your clients, and the insights that AI can provide us is far greater than ever before. So what do you think about my hypothesis around human communication and its relevance in the age of AI?
I agree 100%. The whole point of the book really was, how do you stand out in your communication skills in a world where there's so much noise and so many people trying to articulate ideas the exact same way? And if you think about it, AI is this amalgamation of everybody else's information, the way to communicate it. I know if I put something into ChatGPT, it comes back as a very generic feeling and sounding type of regurgitation of information. And I think that what that's going to do is put an even greater premium on personality, viewpoint, insight, all the very human things that we can bring to the equation that right now generative AI can't do. Now, it's very likely that it'll continue to get better and better at all those things. But, if I put into ChatGPT, hey, give me a really good analogy for supply chain problems, what I'll typically get is about 4 paragraphs of something that would take me 2 minutes to explain. It's not really good at the pithy and punchy yet.
No.
So it's a little clunky in those areas where human personality and point of view can still reign.
Yeah, I shared this on the show previously. I was playing around with the chatbot and asked her how her day was, and she reminded me that she's AI. As humans, we have experiences that we bring to all of these presentations and talks, and those anecdotes and the vulnerability behind it and the story is what connects us more than the data and the facts. When you're querying ChatGPT, it's going to pull all that information for you, the data. It's going to help strengthen the slide and put together the chart, but it's not going to add the anecdote. It's not going to add the experience that your audience is going to walk away with.
And I worry that people are going to delegate all that mental activity that goes into devising a way to communicate. The brain's a muscle, right? You use it or lose it.
Yeah.
And if you start abdicating even the writing of emails to ChatGPT, pretty soon you're going to lose the ability to just deliver something engaging that somebody's going to want to read.
Well, I know growing up, if we were going on a trip, my dad was pulling out the map and we were figuring out the stops and where the gas stations would be.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
I don't even think about how to read a map. I couldn't tell you how to plot out a multi-state road trip like my dad used to do.
Yeah.
And exactly your point, use it or lose it. The more we actually go to technology, the less likely we are to be able to use it in those key moments where you're not going to have GPT in your ear and you're going to be put on the spot and you're going to have to be memorable.
Or if the contact file on your phone got wiped out, how many phone numbers would you actually know to dial? Maybe the top
Scary.
5, right? But that's about it. Yeah. So I think that I agree with you 100% that engaging communication skills are going to be more important than ever moving forward.
And to your earlier point, with our attention span shrinking so much, your ability to get to the point sooner and sooner and hook someone in the first 5 seconds when they're scrolling, when they're thinking about what they're going to eat for lunch and they're staring at the clock is going to be even more important.
Yeah, there are a lot of studies that show in the first 7 seconds, people are making half a dozen value judgments about you. 7 seconds. Are you friend or foe? Are you somebody I'm going to want to hang with for the next 20 minutes and listen to? Do you seem like you have command of the information? All those things kick in very, very quickly. And it's ironic to me that most people in presentations leave the greatest degree of winging it for the first 90 seconds, when that is the most important part of the presentation. And you should really know your first dance moves cold. And most people don't.
Well, you talk about in the book the importance of likability. And
Yeah.
You have a great example of a woman who says, I got the job because I was the person you could sit on the bus with. That part often isn't thought about in the preparation for a talk. Like, how likable am I going to be on stage is probably not rattling around in most of our minds as we're putting together the deck and we're thinking about all the charts and data that we have to present. But that likability is so key in that first 90 seconds.
I heard this really interesting definition / equation for authenticity the other day. Somebody said authenticity equals passion plus warmth. And I do feel as though when people put a deck together, they're not thinking, where are the moments where I can display warmth to the audience and really connect with them? And, one of the things that happens when people are nervous presenting and they just want to get through it technically clean without any incidents at all, the first thing to disappear is a smile. People don't smile when they're nervous. And I'm often telling clients, greatest cloaking device on the planet to your nerves. If you can muster appropriately placed smiles, that will cloud people's impression that you may be nervous.
Yeah, and we see this time and time again in our training where we film interactions, and one of the first points we make before filming is nonverbal communication. Smile is going to put everyone at ease in these scenarios, and we'll pause the video before we start replaying it and go, okay, how'd you feel about your smile? And everyone self-rates their smile higher than it actually is in those tense moments. So internally, we often feel like we're projecting that passion and we feel like we're projecting that warmth. But in actuality, experiencing it and seeing yourself back in video, 9 times out of 10, you're not.
You are so right, AJ, because when we video people in sessions and we show it back to them, inevitably, the number one thing they say is, wow, I look kind of bored. and it's exactly what you just said. They had this mental image that they were bringing it. And now when they see it on a screen, they realize that they were flatlining a bit.
Yeah. So with obviously the rise of video, we can start to see the nonverbal signals. And with AI, we can actually start to analyze our presentations like we have never been able to before. It'll actually get the tonality and start to measure, okay, these are the moments where you were actually passionate based on what we picked up on. So how are you using AI tools to analyze and improve your presentations and your clients?
We use a tool called Udly, and we use it as a complement. And what I mean by that is I will videotape people, I'll record people either giving a presentation or in a Q&A situation, and I will provide the feedback. But we also feed the video through this tool, and it will measure their speaking pace, their filler words, their redundancy words, their non-inclusive words. But there are certain things that are just very interesting that it can reveal. I could tell this woman that I mentioned earlier, you're speaking a little too fast. And maybe she'll accept my feedback, maybe she won't.
Yeah.
But if she sees that it's 60 words per minute over the speed limit, then I think it sinks in a little bit more, that cold, hard data.
Yeah, the quantification.
Yeah. And there was another person that I was training recently, who kept in my mind, it seemed like he kept saying, we're just really focused on blank. We're just really focused on this. And I thought, wow, it seems like he said that a lot. So I fired up the AI tool, and I'm able now to pinpoint exactly where in the interview he said it. And it was very interesting because every time he said it, he was dodging a question. I could tell from the transcript where it identified all the times he said it. So the AI tool was able to really confirm it for me that he was using it. It became a tell.
Right.
That I could now extrapolate that he was being evasive in his answers. Or it will have like literally a graph that shows speed. And so if it's undulating and it's moderate but then fast, I'm able to pinpoint the fast part and say, see, every time you sped up to the top of the zone, it was on a question you didn't feel confident with.
Right.
So there's certain tools that allow us to take the analysis maybe one layer deeper.
Yeah, where to focus, maybe to spend some more time actually preparing and recognizing, okay, maybe this is where I'm getting out over my skis based on what AI is telling me.
Right, exactly. So I think it's a great complement in the training world. But it's interesting. There are often times where the AI tool will provide certain broader feedback that I don't agree with at all.
Yeah.
It's
been a very similar experience for us where clients will be like, okay, I'm now messing with this AI tool and it's telling me all these things. And it's like, well, that's not what I'm experiencing as a human. So yes, it has, ones and zeros that it's crunching based on how it's looking at your presentation, but me experiencing it as an audience member, I'm not getting that.
Right. For instance, let's say you're a client of ours wanted to use an analogy, and there's a good place to put an analogy and there's a bad place to put an analogy. I find that when people blurt it out at the beginning of an answer or in the beginning of a section, it feels very contrived. It feels very canned, like they've been practicing in front of the mirror all day. And the better way to do it is to build towards it so that you can create the illusion that this clever idea has just come to you in the moment. The AI tool will simply reference the fact, good strategy there to use an analogy. It will not be taking into account
the placement.
Some of the subtler ideas.
Right. So it's a tool that's supportive, but I wouldn't rely on it just for analysis.
Exactly. But it's interesting because I think back, maybe it was 12 years ago, somewhere in that neighborhood, where a couple of students from MIT called me and said, hey, we're building this app and it's going to teach people how to be better public speakers. And I had the same exact response that everybody who's ever been disrupted by AI has said. It's like, yeah, I don't think that's going to be able to do what I do.
Yeah.
And I mean, I helped them with a certain insight as to what, but it's established itself as you said, a good complement.
Yeah. And I think, listen, if you can get the data and you can use it in a meaningful way to improve, why not?
Yeah.
But don't rely on it as a crutch. Recognize that you're not talking to an audience of AI.
Right.
Hopefully.
Right.
You're
exactly.
actually talking to humans, and that's what really matters.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can our audience find out more about the book and the work that you do?
The book synopsis is at claritymediagroup.com/speakmemorably, which is the name of the book. And it comes out first week of June. Very excited about it. And really, it's designed to make sure that this golden opportunity that people in business have all over the world every day to make what they say count, that opportunity is kind of being squandered.
Yeah.
And it's a shame. And I want to make sure that those opportunities are seized instead of squandered. And that's what the book is really designed to do.
Well, thank you for a memorable conversation.
I really enjoyed it, AJ. Thank you.